Hi, good evening. Thank you all for joining tonight. I'm Stacy Rackison. I am doing a little host introduction right now before we get to Megan, who's going to be the star of tonight's talk. This is UC Santa Barbara's career series. It is virtual, but since most of us are also living both in a hybrid world, it's just our career series that we're now doing. And I'm part of the UCSB Alumni Council, and so is Megan and a number of others on this call. And we are happy to be able to provide some insights into careers that many of us are in and see if there's a way we can connect with what you're doing in class and thinking about your careers, and if we can be able to provide some insights. This is why we're all here. So just so you know, we do have a number of upcoming series. Hold on one second. Trying to get to the slides here. So save the dates. We do have a few others coming up before the end of the term. And they are on Wednesdays, 6 to 7 by Zoom. If you can't make it, do sign up because we will also have these recorded and they will be available to you, I believe, on, is it Shoreline?
The videos are actually available on our website.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
that link that you will show or did show, they're all there.
Great. And to sign up, I'll put that in the chat later because these slides they have a pretty long registration link, so I'll put that in the chat in just a minute. But I first want to welcome Meghan Killian, who's going to talk about her career in marketing, entertainment, and law. She is a part of our alumni council, and we'll have some great insights for you tonight. And she'll do a brief presentation, and then please do feel free. We'll have a Q&A at the end. Like I said, if you're going to ask in person, which I think is great, do show yourself on camera. And if you wanted to also put it in the chat, you can do that as well. Thank you.
Perfect. I'm going to switch over to sharing my screen. Let me know if everybody can see that. You good? Okay, perfect. So thank you so much, Stacy. As Stacy said, my name is Meghan Killian. I'm an attorney at Duane Morris. And tonight, feel free at any time to stop me, ask questions. But I figured I'd give a little bit of a background on how I got into my current career, because it was a little bit of a non-direct route. And then a overview of just what I do, because not many people know. So I graduated from UCSB in 2010. And I have up here just kind of a series of images. I was actually a double major, both communication and psychology. I went into the communication major first, took about as many classes as I could, still had some time, did not want to graduate and enter the real world. So I picked up another major so I could stick around. While I was at UCSB with the communication department, I was also the treasurer for Lambda Pi Eta for the Communication Association. I studied abroad twice. I spent a summer in Greece with the classics department. Had nothing to do with what I studied, but it sounded fun and entertaining and interesting, and I loved it. And then I spent the semester in London at the UC Extension program with a bunch of other UC students, and also loved it. I worked for I think 3 of my 4 years at the faculty club, which is now called the Club and Guest House. And I absolutely loved it. I got to meet a lot of different faculty. Chancellor Yang actually wrote my letter of recommendation to get into law school because I would serve him lunch most days of the week. So it was a great opportunity to get to know faculty and be on campus, and I couldn't recommend it enough. When I was a student, I know nowadays it's very common to do externships and internships and all of that. That was not a common practice, I would say, when I was a student. Some people did, but it definitely wasn't a requirement. But I did do a internship with Ensemble Theater Company in downtown Santa Barbara my senior year. And that was really interesting. I worked with their development department, putting on events to raise money. That was before, and now they're at the New Vic. They had a prior theater that they were raising money for. We did a lot of events in Montecito, working with donors throughout Santa Barbara and Montecito. And the development director I actually worked under at Ensemble Theater is now at UCSB. Meghan, at that time, her name was Meghan Fay. I forget what her married last name is, but that was a great experience just to get involved in the Santa Barbara community. And then a couple pictures. When I was a freshman, I was in the Anacapa dorms, and we were the Anacapa Pirates during what they used to do. I don't know if they still do, all hall brawl, where we engaged in kind of competition against the other dorms. And then me and my friends at what is no longer around, but was Geo's, which had a great patio. This, I think, was our senior year. And then my mom and I on my graduation day. So when I graduated from Santa Barbara, I had every intention of going into publicity and becoming a publicist. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to me in my daydream of being at UCSB, when I graduated in 2010, it was right after the Great Recession. So the Great Recession ended around mid-2009, but the economy was still really weak when I was graduating. I was actually applying and going into some fellowship programs and training programs for different publicity agencies in New York that I met actually during one of the very first career days many years ago. A lot of those programs shut down when funding and everything got pulled and the economy went down. So I actually moved back home, not knowing what I was going to do, and worked at a local company called Foster Farms. And I worked there for about a year and a half in their pricing department, pricing chicken and trying to figure out whether this is what the rest of my life was going to look like or what I would do. I then took a long, hard look at like, okay, if marketing agencies and different publicists aren't hiring, what could I do? And I remember taking a class with, I believe he's still around, but Professor Linz had a communication media law class. And I was like, well, I could go to law school and then delay the inevitable of finding a job for another 3 years. So that's what I did. And I looked around for different law schools, and I found one in San Francisco, the University of San Francisco School of Law, that had a program specific to intellectual property. And one of their professors was a renowned expert in IP, had a whole program set up at USF. And so that's where I ended up going. While I was at USF, I started in 2012 and specialized in IP while I was studying. The picture on the right, I did a summer internship at a trademark IP firm in Beijing called Wan Huida, who I now actually work closely with in my practice day to day. So that was my summer in China. The next picture is me and my now husband. We met in law school. He is also an attorney, but a public defender. So very different criminal law than what I do. This was our graduation day. And so then when I graduated, I went to work in-house with a mobile video game company called Kabam. And at that point, Kabam was kind of in their heyday. They were one of the major sponsors for UC Berkeley's field. It was actually called Kabam Field. This was inside one of our many offices. We had offices worldwide, and we focused on mobile video games. And it was kind of the perfect intro for what I'll later explain, my practice area of IP, because we constantly dealt with licensing agreements with major studios. And one of our major games that we released was Marvel Contest of Champions. So while I was there, I was constantly working with our video game engineers and designers, as well as Disney, who owned Marvel, to figure out licensing rights for different superheroes. I never had any idea how many different types of superheroes there were until I was told that I needed, this version of Superman from this year that had these capabilities, and had to enter into negotiations with Marvel in order to get those types of rights to put into our game. We also did work with the marketing team on different branding protections and clearance of new games. I was with Kabam for about a year and a half when we decided to sell the company, and we were looking at various acquirers. We looked at a couple different ones and ended up selling most of the company to a company called Netmarble based out of Korea. The rest of Kabam moved to headquarters in Canada. At that point, I knew that I wasn't going to move to Canada, so I needed to find a new job, and reconnected, or not reconnected. I stayed very close with an attorney that became more of a mentor while I was in law school, and who at that time was looking to hire an associate attorney. And because I had constantly stayed in contact with him, I reached back out, and timing was perfect, and I went to work at Duane Morris. Duane Morris is considered a big law firm, so we're worldwide. We have, I think, 20-something offices here in the United States. We also have offices in London, Singapore, and a couple different locations in South America, and then we have probably about 900 attorneys. I am an attorney in our intellectual property department. And so I would say my practice as a lawyer focuses on 3 things. So when we say intellectual property, it's a phrase that a lot of people don't know what that entails. And so when I look at my clients and the work we do, I focus on 3 different things: trademarks, copyright, and right of publicity. So trademarks are really easy. Everybody's seen them. Everybody knows them. Think of your favorite brand names, slogans, just do it, product packaging. So really iconic product packaging like the Tiffany's blue box, or certain designs of actual devices. So the original iPod, iPhone, things like that. Basically anything that's a brand, anything you associate with a company. The second bucket, copyright, is more of the content. So movies, movie scripts, music, books, art, that is all protected under copyright laws. And then right of publicity is really popular right now, given recent decisions in college sports. So name, image, and likeness. If you're a celebrity, if you're an athlete, the use of your image, the use of your name, and anything that sounds like you, you have rights in. For a long time in college sports, athletes could not own rights in their name, image, and likeness. Could not make money off of it. That is a big recent change. But those are kind of the 3 main categories of what I focus on in my practice. Who do I work with? One of the reasons why I love my job is I can literally work with probably anybody. Everybody has some sort of IP right. that needs protection. So I work with companies of all sizes. I work with some of the biggest brands in the United States. I also work with local restaurants, local artists, anyone really. And I work with companies in all industries. I have clients in the automotive industry, medical devices, entertainment. And then one portion of my practice that I really love is I am really internationally focused. So I have attorneys that I work with worldwide. So when I mentioned earlier that I interned when I was in law school with a Chinese law firm, I still work with them to this day. I got the experience when I was there of doing a lot of counterfeiting work. So we worked with local authorities in different areas of China dealing with counterfeit products, organizing raids with the local governments to go in and seize property. And all of that was mostly for US companies. Nowadays, I work with them on this side, where I have a lot of US clients that are either seeing counterfeits of their products coming out of China, or they're trying to figure out how to enter the Chinese market and not to have to deal with any counterfeit issues. Today, I was dealing with a client issue in the Netherlands. Once a year, I go to a conference where I literally see all of my colleagues from around the world to figure out what issues are happening with brand development, marketing, protection, counterfeiting issues within all those jurisdictions. The international focus is really fun, and I constantly think back to things that I learned as a communications student, because issues come up where oftentimes a company or client will come to me. They're going to release a new product or a new marketing campaign, and they're going to do it internationally. So I can do what we call clearance work here in the United States, where I look, one, to see if there's any other company that we might infringe on. So they have a brand that we might be accused of copying or coming too close to. And I can look at local laws. But for international companies, I have to rely upon my foreign associates to figure out, well, are there any country-specific laws in those jurisdictions that we might run afoul of? For many years, I represented a perfume company. And one of their best-selling perfumes, they were based out of Paris, was doing great in Paris. It was doing great here in the United States, and they wanted to enter the market in Dubai. And what I found out when we were doing a lot of clearance work and working with local counsel is the name they used was actually considered a highly religious name. And so there were local laws that prevented companies from using branding that incorporated that name locally. So we had to redo the branding specifically for the Dubai market based on local customs and things like that. So that's a really fun aspect of my job, along with working very closely with a number of different people. So I talked earlier that I work closely with marketing teams within companies. So in the ideal world, before a marketing team launches any sort of ad campaign or names a product, they come to me first, and I do all the clearance and I work with them to figure out if there's any risk. I would say 90% of the time there's some risk, and we have to figure out how to minimize it or what we're going to do if someone sues us. And so working with those teams really closely from the beginning of a product or an ad development to the end is really fun. But then there's also times where I've gotten calls, especially with certain automotive clients, where they literally have cars that are on the factory floor about to have a new mark imprinted into the metal, and they want to know if it's okay. So I have an hour to figure out whether or not I need to stop all production in this factory, or if we can go ahead, or what amount of money we should set aside because we might see litigation down the road. So day to day is very interesting, just depending upon the client, how risk averse they are, how cutting edge they want to be. We also work with a lot of artists, especially artists that do collaborations with major companies, or find that their art is being used in advertisements without their consent. That happens a lot. Writers protecting their work. And then nowadays, a lot of influencers. So companies that want to work with influencers, influencers that want to own the content that they're creating. So we really figure out, okay, if we're going to do a collaboration between a company and an influencer, or a company and an actor, what does that look like? Who owns the reel that this influencer is going to create? Or how much money do we give to an influencer depending upon how much market value they gain for us? One of the really exciting areas I think of my job is that I get a front row seat to all the changing marketing strategies. And where there begins to become an issue is law is very, very slow, and we're constantly backwards facing. So if you think of law is incredibly slow, so we constantly have to figure out oftentimes how to fit like a round peg into a square hole. Like, what are we going to do when inevitably some issue is going to arise, and how do we adjust current laws to that? So the emergence of TikTok was a big one. Things like TikTok Shop with counterfeits. When things come up, we're constantly readjusting how we approach them, and that is incredibly exciting to me. Okay. I have not worked on any of these cases, as a disclaimer, otherwise I wouldn't show them. But just kind of show how this plays out in day to day. So I have 3 examples of disputes that have risen based on trademark issues, copyright issues, and then right of publicity. So at the top, we're talking about copyright. So the classic Winnie the Pooh was a work that was protected under copyright laws for many, many years, until what it became, we call it, it entered the public domain. So copyright is only protectable for 70-ish years, depending upon various factors. After that time, you can take a previously copyrighted work and create a new work from that content. So Winnie the Pooh entered the public domain, I think 2 years ago at this point, 3 years ago. And right after it entered the public domain, a horror movie based on Winnie the Pooh, which is shown on the left, was released. And Disney did everything they could to try to roll back the release of this horror movie. But based on copyright law and the protections they had, there was only so much they can do. And basically, besides entering a campaign to show that they were not connected to this horror movie, part of copyright law is to ignite innovation and new works. So really, to the true purpose of copyright, which is in the US Constitution, the creation of the Winnie the Pooh horror movie is exactly what the founders of the United States had in mind. Down on the right, because you're college students and are probably familiar with at least the brand on the right, Keystone was for many years known as Keystone. There is a local brewery in San Diego called Stone IPA that ended up suing Keystone a couple years ago when they launched a new marketing campaign where they highlighted the stone of Keystone on all of their packaging, and really downplayed the key portion. This was definitely a David versus Goliath scenario, where a local company was suing a big name and they ended up winning and getting millions of dollars in damages, stating that Keystone was trying to basically ride on their coattails and confuse consumers that their high quality local craft brews were somehow connected to Keystone, found on many college campuses. And then at the bottom left is Biggie Smalls, Notorious B.I.G. His estate sued an artist a couple years ago over right of publicity. His image was used on various clothing items. And the estate sued, stating that they had no right to use his image on clothing without his estate's consent. They end up settling, but this is often where we see a lot of right of publicity cases come in, is where athletes, actors, or singers are used on promotional materials without their authorization. Paparazzi images being used on Instagram ads comes up a lot. And yeah. And then, let's see, that's kind of my main spiel. Does anybody have any questions? Otherwise, I can go a little deeper into some of these things.
And feel free, if you're uncomfortable going on camera, you can feel free to put questions in the chat. Otherwise, Megan, do you want to go in deeper on any area in particular? I mean, I guess maybe I'll just start with a question for you, unless Ron's raising his hand. Ron.
I just thought you had such great international early on experiences, and now you're doing international. Do you feel that really gave you an advantage or insight, or that people, when they were hiring you, took that into account?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I think it just allowed me to realize, just doing a lot of traveling while I was studying abroad, and how different marketing is. For example, a lot of what we do is also adjusting products or marketing campaigns, kind of as I mentioned earlier, based on the population. So we have a theory in trademark law called gray market goods. And it's basically where products end up where they shouldn't end up. So one of the main examples we often use is soap, like a bar of soap. Here in the United States, consumers don't think that soap works unless it really lathers. Like that is a portion of a product that we look for. So shampoo, bar soap, anything, unless it has a lather, we think it doesn't get you clean. In other parts of the world, that is not the case. So oftentimes products will be adjusted, and then therefore the branding used on the product is adjusted based on the, likes of that consumer base. So I think just seeing how that plays out just by traveling definitely sparked my interest, and it gave me a perspective when I was talking to local council, just being curious about what their trends are, what they're seeing, definitely helps.
What would be you've had some interesting jobs that, it's like nothing, there's no straight path, right? And I think all of us are like coming out of, like when we come out of college, we're doing one thing and we don't see the direct connections. So what was like one fun career like path that you took where you did something that was like, you didn't think it would lead anywhere and you found it to be the most useful for your work today?
So I would say, one thing I didn't mention that I did when I was a student was I was a research assistant. And I was a research assistant with a grad student that was working with Professor Giles, who did a lot of police communication safety. And the graduate student was looking specifically at accommodation theory and how police interactions changed based on who they were interacting with. And so I would literally watch videos of police cameras, like recorded from the officers doing the arrest, and would time the amount of pauses between words, between sentences, to show, especially when there was a language disparity between the officer and the person getting arrested, how that either escalated or de-escalated any sort of aggression within the traffic stop. And I think that when I look back, because I did just go to law school and then I went and worked at Kabam, and then I've been at my firm currently, I don't have a career decision that really changed, or I look back on that made a big change. But I think that was one that I chose because I thought, well, this might look good on a resume someday. And I constantly think about it, because when I'm on calls with foreign counsel or with a new client, how I speak to them or match their speech patterns or just work with them reminds me of that study that I did, and how, really just paying attention to the people I'm communicating with changes our relationship, both in making sure that foreign counsel understands me, that my clients feel comfortable, and things like that. So it was also interesting because I remember before I took Professor Linz's class, I equated law school with criminal law and nothing else. And I knew I did not want to do criminal law. So I took the idea of even going to law school completely off the shelf. And then I realized that there's this whole area of law that works hand in hand with what we think of as traditional communication careers, marketing, publicity, entertainment in general. And I wouldn't say I am naturally the most creative person, but I love being around creative people. So being able to work with them in that way has been really interesting. And I can honestly say it took me a long time to get into my current firm, because people stay in the practice of this area of law for a really long time because they enjoy it and it's constantly changing. It's not always the most contentious. When we think of lawyers and think of arguing, there are definitely those moments when we're in litigation or we have, a counterfeiter or something like that, where it can be very combative. But oftentimes it's not. It's me working with, a marketing team trying to figure out how to make their vision come alive without putting the company at risk. So my job is to figure out how it can happen.
That's impressive.
I'll also say, one of the things, especially I think with my husband being a public defender, I always think of how he has such a impact on the world, right? Like he's working in criminal law. There is that aspect to intellectual property in the counterfeiting space, is where I would say we deal with the most sometimes dangerous scenarios. So some of the biggest counterfeiting issues that have come up in recent years are counterfeit airplane parts that the government has bought. There was a period of time where counterfeit baby food was entering the market, counterfeit medication. So when we think of IP, oftentimes we do think of the more sunny side, which I really like and enjoy and would say is most of my work. But there are attorneys in the IP field that focus solely on counterfeit issues. And oftentimes is the more dark side of dealing with money laundering of criminal organizations that do it a lot through counterfeit fashion products, and then the really dangerous counterfeit products that flood the market. So there are many different facets of IP as well. It's just how you focus on it.
I don't know if there's any questions from anyone else. I can jump in with a few other thoughts. Oh, Caroline, I can read this for you if you'd like. And if you have something else to say, please feel free to add. When entering law school, Megan, did you know that this was a field of law you wanted to pursue?
Yes, because I think I spent those 2 years after college trying to figure out what I was going to do. So I did go in with a focus on IP. That being said, I would say most of my colleagues that I work with in this field did not. A lot of them ended up there through working in other practices of law, and then they were on a case, and then this is what they ended up specializing in. So there is definitely not one singular path. I would also say, because this reminded me of, even though the reason why I took 2 years off before I went into law school was because I didn't know initially what I wanted to do, I think those 2 years were incredibly valuable. And I would recommend anyone that is on the fence about going to law school to just take a moment. And it is completely okay to take a year to 5 years and do something different, until you realize that this is something you want to do. It's going to law school is not cheap, but your career is really long. And so what might think like an eternity when you're graduating and not knowing what you're going to do is such a blip of time in the length of your career, that there is nothing wrong with taking a second and figuring it out if that's really what you want to do. I also think it's incredibly valuable when I'm hiring junior attorneys or looking for student interns. There are, when I see that someone had prior work experience before entering law school, that is sometimes a big benefit for me, because I know you've worked in an office environment, you've worked around people. Having your first ever job as a lawyer is really intimidating. So being at least able to say, I did X, Y, and Z for 2 years, and I don't really care what it is. Before I went to work for Foster Farms, I was waitressing. And I think being a waitress gives you valuable skills for being a lawyer, because we too are in the client service industry. I work for my clients, and whatever they need, I have to be there to get it for them and make sure that they're happy. So it's very similar to working in a restaurant or working retail. So definitely don't think you ever have to have things figured out before you go forward.
Hey, Megan, let me ask a question, since we're in the future, like thinking about the future of the workforce. Janelle also brought this up, and I was thinking about this as well. Here in San Francisco in the Bay Area, AI is like the new buzzword. So, what kind of impact are you seeing in terms of IP law? And how do you see it in the future of like content creation, especially with the ease of AI's growth?
I mean, it's huge. It's something we're paying incredibly close attention to. There's a number of lawsuits right now that we're getting daily updates on. And I really don't know where it's going to end. I've advised clients that are creating their own systems on what they can do to not infringe others. So making sure pictures that they use to train their models, images they use are all created internally, that they're not scraping from websites. It kind of goes back to what I was talking about how law is often looking backwards, but we're in an industry that's always looking forwards. So a lot of times I explain that it's the same as teaching clients and marketing teams, don't just grab an image off of Google. It belongs to someone. And if they find that you used it in your ad, they're gonna be angry. And it's the same for companies creating AI tools of, don't just grab content to train your models because someone's gonna be angry. On the opposite hand, we have content creators that we're working with on how to protect their content in terms of metadata, how it won't be scraped. Just kind of waiting to see where the courts land, if they do, if these things often settle, and it might be decades before we get a ruling on whether or not something is truly an infringement. But it is a very, very hot area right now. And I think that's also valuable for people coming into the workforce, that if you have knowledge about AI, cutting edge technology, social media platforms, that is incredibly valuable. You wouldn't imagine the times that I've called my high school age nieces and nephews to have them teach me how to use TikTok, or where to look if I'm looking for certain things on a social media platform, because I'm not familiar with it. And it just kind of goes down from there. I rely on my interns, junior associates, everyone to for us to train each other so we're familiar with these tools.